Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Michael and Mom Talk Cancer. I am your host, Michael.
Hi, and I'm Ashlee. I'm his mom. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is episode 2, as Michael said.
And today we're going to be talking about the 3 rounds of chemotherapy I had to get me into remission before my transplant.
Yes, chemotherapy, that fun thing that we always hear about.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the side effects, the mental side effects, and basically everything that was going through my mind during this part of my treatment.
Exactly. So we dove a little bit into, how we felt and what everything was like when Michael was diagnosed. And now, once he started chemotherapy, it became not just what was happening physically, but what was happening mentally, not only with us, but the people surrounding us. And we kind of want to talk a little bit about that today and share that side of it with you.
Yes, so I remember getting to the hospital that day on August 3rd and talking to Dr. D in his office, and then, being transported to the 6th tower where I was going to start my first session of chemo. And I remember it was kind of early in the morning when we had got there, and we were transported up there sometime around 11 o'clock, and I was told I was going to start chemo, right away. But because of how, the hospital works, sometimes things get delayed, and the chemo actually started that night at like 11. And I remember sitting there in bed, watching the NBA because it had just returned, and taking a Snapchat of my first chemo ever, and just being so nervous for like the side effects that were going to come from it, because I'd heard a lot about, the nausea, the loss of appetite, the weight loss, and all these different things. And
the hair loss.
Yeah, and I remember that those first days of chemo, I didn't feel anything, like literally nothing. Those first 5 days I spent in the hospital, I was just, tired. That was really it. And I thought, like, wow, this is kind of going to be a breeze. And then the funny thing is, I remember getting home from the chemo, and all of a sudden, I got these, like, terrible mouth sores, and everything just started to come up really fast. Like, immediately, I started losing my hair. Like, I sat down on the toilet one time, and I was about to take a shower, and I remember just putting my hands through my hair because I was just, fixing it, and then all of a sudden I start to like put my hand down and look at it, and there's just like strings of hair in there, and I'm just sitting there like, already?
That's what was crazy, because actually, as some of you know, we'd been through chemotherapy with my husband, 4 years before this, and well, actually 5 years before this. And because Michael's cancer is so aggressive, that was one of the things we learned, was that his chemotherapy was going to be very aggressive.
Yeah.
Also, sometimes I think it sounds not that important, like, okay, losing your hair, what's the big deal? But there is something very emotional about running your hands through your hair and a big chunk falls out. And it's like a feeling of mortality, a feeling of, what does this mean? What's going on in my body?
It kind of symbolizes like losing your health. It feels weird because hair is one of the most fast-growing cells in your body, and
which is the reason that it falls out,
right?
Of course.
Which is the reason why, because that's the goal of chemo, is to kill all fast-growing cells, aka the cancerous cells in your body, which is why you lose hair from chemo.
They had planned in the beginning for 2 to 6 cycles. In the end, it ended up being 3, but they were 2 to 6 that were really going to knock him down really hard to get rid of this cancer so he could be in remission, so he could get to the bone marrow transplant. And that first day, as Michael said, we were in Dr. D'Angulo's, in the clinic, in the office. And when he told us the real diagnosis, and he said, you're going to start chemo today, and it was kind of an adventure. We went to the 6th tower, and it's a teaching hospital, actually, Nicholas. And so I remember there was like a crew of Dr. D'Angulo, and then all of these residents, and also his nurse practitioner Erica, who became very important in our lives.
I remember that night she gave me a piece of pizza for my first chemo, so that was pretty memorable. Thank you for that, Erica.
Yes, Erica, we love you. We still love you. We don't see her quite as often now, but that lady's amazing. she changed our lives. And I remember her coming in with that group of people, and she had, printed out, and she handed me this stack of papers with all of the chemotherapies that they were going to give Michael. And
Also, okay, I remember looking at them and being like, looking at the side effects written on them, and I was like, you know what? I'm just not even going to read this paper because I'm just going to scare myself. Because if you look at the common side effects, the least common side effects, and the possible side effects, you're going to freak out. So my mom looked at them, but she didn't tell me
I
because she didn't
did
want to put anything in
not.
my head. She kind of just told me, the most common ones so I could be a little prepared. And they
Yeah,
weren't,
things like hair loss, like nausea, we were kind of prepared for
yeah.
that. So I was like, you know what, we're gonna stick to the basics on this.
Hmm.
But the other thing, because hepatosplenic lymphoma is one of those really rare cancers, I think I've looked it up. There's not even that much information about it. There's not many more than 200 documented cases, like actually ever. And so there's no set protocol. And I didn't really know this before, but each cancer has a set protocol. If you have a certain kind of leukemia, they're going to give you like R-CHOP or, whatever that is, and you get those chemotherapies. But with hepatosplenic lymphoma, it was basically Dr. Diangulo doing research on what he had seen work. And for example, at first they told me there were 4 days of chemotherapy. They told Michael and I, okay, by Thursday night, Friday morning, you'll head home. And I remember I think it was the next day, on Tuesday, he was admitted the Monday, he started chemotherapy that night. And on Tuesday, he like came in with this like excited attitude, and he was like, oh my god, I'm gonna add an extra day for you because I found some research about this other chemo called PEG, and it works great with what you have, Michael, so we're gonna add that on Friday. And he hands me this like printed out documentation about how PEG could possibly work. And it was cool. I felt like the really, there are amazing things about being diagnosed with something that's rare, and tough things. The tough things is it's not like, okay, we do this and it works. But the cool thing is everyone was so, excited
Yeah, I
and
feel like everyone was like interested in me. It was kind of like a research project in a way because not many people have seen this before. And when they added the PEG, it was like it's a common chemo. People get it, but
right.
for my protocol, it's not really heard of. So it was just interesting to see Dr. D and everyone at the hospital, work together to try to find something on me, like some research that could help me get into remission fast.
Yeah, and not that they don't care about all their patients, 100% they do, but I think it's been really interesting. It's been an interesting process for us and a learning process to see how this works. And sometimes I think that we think medicine is very mathematical and 2 plus 2 equals 4. And we have learned that it's not. It's an art, especially, cancer. There's a lot of, I don't want to say trial and error, but a lot of trial and success. We've had a lot of good things happen. And yeah, that day of PEG was an added thing, and it ended up. Do you want to tell the fun story? I think he has to share
I
the
think I do,
story
yes.
about this nurse.
So on my fifth day, which was PEG of my first chemotherapy cycle, I had this nurse named Valerie, and
We're
she,
still close with her,
yeah.
by the way.
So this chemo can have like reactions on site when you get it. So I was a little bit nervous for it, and she knew that. So she came in and tried to distract me the whole time and just talk to me. So we had this conversation, and she was asking me, what do I like to do? And I told her I like to surf and go in the ocean. And she kept telling me how afraid she was of sharks. Like she would not go in the water because of sharks. And then ever since then, like it's been a running joke between us about sharks. And every time I've been admitted to the hospital, she'll print out shark homework for me. And it's so funny because it's just this great relationship we have over a chemo.
Yeah,
So
and
it's just hysterical to me.
it really is. And it kind of, that's really how it's been kind of this whole time, is that, just like Dr. Diangulo being excited about adding chemos and taking care of Michael. And the nurses have been like friends. I mean, Val came in there and sat with us while, I can't remember how long it was, but I want to say it was a good hour or two while he was receiving this chemo. Did not leave his side the entire time, trying to make him laugh, trying to distract him, talking about sharks, talking about the water. It was really such a human experience, and very different from the experience I lived with Michael's dad. And it's been beautiful, and the care that they have given to Michael and to me, and just, they've shown us so much love. But that has literally radiated out from day one, from Dr. D'Angulo to Erica, his nurse practitioner, to the residents who have been so interested in Michael, to the nurses that have become our friends, to the people in my life, my friends, Michael's friends, that have been so supportive. I feel like that has been a huge lesson in how I like to be very independent. And the support has, in the beginning, I was a little resistant to have so much support. I cannot tell you this lesson. I have needed the support. We have been grateful for it, blown away from everyone in our lives, right?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
So I'd say one of the biggest mental struggles I had during my chemo was, I wanted to be in school. I wanted to be as normal as I could.
And they actually encouraged us, try to keep life as normal as possible. And I remember Dr. Giangulo telling us, I've had kids that have gone through chemo that have been able to go to school, and this is pre-COVID, but still that they were able to go to school, live their normal lives, even throughout chemo, not miss school. So we were like, Michael's an athlete. He's this mentally strong person. Like, he can definitely handle this. And especially with COVID, it's going to be on Zoom, online. He'll definitely be able to handle going to school. And do you remember the first day? What happened?
I remember the first day because that day I had to go to the hospital and get platelets and a bone marrow biopsy. So that day I went under anesthesia and got an infusion. I remember my class was at like either 1 or 2 in the afternoon. We had rushed home. I hopped on the Zoom late. I stayed on the whole Zoom taking notes as I could. And I was just so exhausted. I couldn't focus. I was lost, and I was so sad, and I couldn't keep up with the class. And I remember once the class finished, we had homework. Then I tried to look at the homework and see what it was, and I just couldn't do it. I was too exhausted. I was feeling awful and nauseous, and I just broke down. I remember crying in my bed, screaming like, oh my God, I have cancer. I can't do school. I can't do this. I have cancer. Oh my God. And my mom was at Publix. I remember calling her, just in tears. I was bawling on my bed. I was like, I can't do this, Mom. I can't do this. I have cancer. I didn't know, like, this is just serious. And it was just this super emotional moment for me when I really grasped the reality of what I was actually going through at 19 years old.
Exactly what Michael just said. I feel like throughout this last, what's a little been over a year, there's been moments that are like those ding moments, and that you just have realizations. And that day, it was this hard morning, and we were rushing to get there in time for his class. We got home. He logs in. I'm like, perfect. You're logged in. I'm going to run to the grocery store, grab some groceries. I'll be back. He calls me, as he said, sobbing. I remember tearing out of the grocery store, getting home, and he's like, Mom, I can't do this. It's too stressful. And it's hard because we've talked about this a lot with Michael and the other doctors. Chemo and cancer, and in the future we'll talk about bone marrow transplant, it is different for every single person. So one person that's able to do school, for Michael, his chemo and his cancer were so intense. It took so much energy just for him to get up and face the day, that facing school was just, it was too daunting. It was too much. It was too much emotionally, too much stress. So
Yeah, it was way too much for me. And, it's so different for everyone, treatments. And it was just this moment, not where it was just too intense. It was just this moment of realization where I realized I have cancer. It wasn't, it didn't feel real. I don't know how to say it. It was just so scary because,
especially seeing all these other kids on Zoom,
yeah,
his
and
age, that looked normal.
everybody in the Zoom, I was looking at their faces. I had my camera off, and they all had hair. They all were somewhere in a room looking good, and I was on my bed, struggling just to stay awake during the call and write down as many notes as I could. And I looked at everyone in the room and I was like, yeah, this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I just felt like a little defeated at that moment. And that was kind of one of the moments where it really hit me what I was actually going through, because everything up to then was so fast. The diagnosis, the treatment, everything was just moving at 100 miles an hour that I really hadn't grasped what I was going through. And I think that was the first moment, my first realization moment of what I was actually fighting.
Yeah, and that he wasn't going through what everyone else was going through on that Zoom, and not everyone could understand. Were there any other like moments like that were like a click or an aha that you really realized that you had cancer?
So yeah, during the chemo, and on one of the days, one of my first days there, some of the social workers had come in and talked to us, and I remember them bringing up Make-A-Wish, and I felt like just weird about that, even though I was 19, so I actually didn't qualify for it, but I remember them talking to me about it and like foundations like that, and I remember just thinking to myself, like, how did I go from surfing a few weeks ago in New Smyrna Beach to, a Make-A-Wish kid? And I just remember, because in my head, I didn't know much about, chemo or cancer or any health issues like that before. So when I heard Make-A-Wish, all I thought was, this is like the last wish before you can possibly die or something. And I remember just sitting there in the bed crying to my mom, like, am I really a Make-A-Wish kid? Like, what is happening right now? And that was one of the most emotional moments during chemo, because I was in the hospital. They were telling me I need to start chemo. I was already starting chemo. I was already on this road, and I'm thinking, what if they don't, think I'm gonna make it? What if they're just, being nice and this? And it was just this mental challenge when I heard that.
Yeah, it was this idea of, are they granting me one last wish? And I remember him crying to me. I was like, no, kiddo, that is not what Make-A-Wish Foundation is about. It's about granting wishes while you're going through a hard time. As Michael said, he didn't qualify, but it was definitely this moment for us, for Michael, that I just felt him like, oh my God, he faced the reality of, I have cancer. I'm a kid that people want to grant wishes to, and not that that's not a great thing, but it was hard
Yeah,
because you're
and
also an independent person.
and I remember also getting home from those first 5 days of chemo, and people messaged me like, I'm so sorry, like all these terrible things, not like terrible things, but messages that were like feeling bad for me, and people like saying like, if you need anything, I'm here. And it kind of made me feel good, the support. But some of the messages scared me, because when people hear you have cancer, they kind of think one thing. It's not always, not everybody is positive and stuff like that. So it scared me when I got a lot of messages, and a lot of the support was great. And when people reached out to me and told me, like, you're strong, you're gonna make it, and sent me nice messages, and told me, someone I know had cancer as well and they're doing fine, you can do it. That encouraged me a lot, and I'm so grateful for all those messages during that time.
But yeah, it is sort of when people we used to message you and be like, hey, let's go to a party, and now they're messaging you and saying, I'm so sorry you have cancer. It is a little bit scary. And it did happen. He got knocked down, as he was saying before, so fast. Like
Yeah, I
the
was so weak when I got home from that chemo. I wasn't feeling terrible, but then the next few days to come, I remember the mouth sores and the hair was falling out. I was sitting on the couch all day, and I couldn't, like, I tried to work out and stay active, but it was so hard. It was just like this struggle immediately from the chemo. It didn't even take any time. It was just right away. Everything, I felt it.
Yeah.
And
And also he'd been on steroids now for a few weeks. So the steroids made his skin was broken out, and he just, like, you could tell he didn't feel comfortable with himself. But I'm going to have Michael tell this next part, because we talked about this recently. But one of the good things, the great thing about having the port, was that he was at that point allowed to go to the beach if his counts were good enough. And I remember it was between the first and second chemo, we went to the beach.
yeah, I went to the beach for one of the first times, but This time I was completely bald, completely pale, no muscle, acne all over. My back was full of scars, but I was the happiest I had been in almost my whole entire life, just because I was allowed in the ocean. And even when I was somewhat muscular, fit, tan, in shape, blonde, I felt insecure at the beach sometimes. I'd be like, are people looking at me? Oh, do I have some acne there? And I actually looked great, but when I was there on the beach, bald and looking awful, I didn't care what anybody thought of me. Like, I didn't care. I was like, you know what? I'm at the beach. Like, you can judge me if you want. Like, I'm going through something. I don't even care. I feel good. It doesn't matter what I look like because I feel great. And I'm allowed to be in the ocean today. So it was this life-changing thing I felt, and I've, kind of learned this throughout all the treatment I've been through, all the different phases my body has been through, that it's really not about how you look at all. Looks
Yeah.
are just, they're
We
just looks, because if you don't feel good, if you're not happy, if you're not at peace with yourself, it's not going to matter. And I remember I was just so at peace with myself, and I remember just being in the water, and I could feel people looking at me because I was bald and all this, but I didn't even care. Like, I was just like, I'm in the water. It feels amazing, and I'm just grateful to
that
be
was
alive.
that was your spot. And we were talking about this yesterday. We all, as parents, I'm a mom, of course you raise your children and you say looks don't matter, looks don't matter, and we all try to live that. But you can't help it. We all care how we look, and that has been a huge lesson that really started. And I remember that day too with Michael, because as he said, his hair had been coming out in chunks, and just a few days before that, he decided, these chunks of hair,
It was
I'm gonna
time to
just,
shave my
yeah, I'm
head.
gonna shave his head. So he and his brother, they went to a good friend of ours, because I was scared to do it because his platelets, his numbers were so low. I was afraid of cutting Michael. So we went to this friend of ours who's a hairdresser, and we've known him. He shaved both boys their heads. And at the same exact time, his whole group of friends, they did it. So I think there was about 7 of them. They all shaved their heads together. And it
That
was,
was that was amazing for me, because my friends, they can't relate to how I feel, but the fact that they went out there and decided to shave their heads to, relate to how I look, and to, you know, support me and spread awareness to what I was going through, was just meant so much. And that was one of the most beautiful moments during chemo for me.
yeah, it was. And that was also, that was like a moment on a lot of levels. Because on one level, it was about looks, and these kids were like, okay, we're going to shave our heads because we don't care how we look. But on another level, that was also the very first time that I took video of what was going on. And I made it into a 1 minute video, and I went into iMovie and I posted on Instagram. And that's when I said to Michael, you know what? I think everything you're going through, we need to share this. I think that this story, and I wanted to share that because his friends just impressed me so much.
And they still do to this day, and I'm so grateful for every single one of them that supports me,
Yeah.
seriously.
And I wanted to share that with people and say, look at this amazing kid with his friend group supporting him. And then from there, it became, you know what, we should share this story. And that was a turning point as well. During chemo was when we really decided that we wanted to share Michael's story, on social media. And kind of, I feel like helping, this is one of our themes, has been when you help someone else, you help yourself. And I feel like for Michael, I think you feel the same way. It kind of takes the energy off of just looking at myself. Not that he has ever been like poor me, because he really hasn't. But chemo, at the time, we thought it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
But
But we didn't understand what was going to be next in the transplant, and what type of chemo was going to be given to me in the transplant, because that was something else. But that's something else we're going to be talking about in the next episode, and get more into detail there. Because although this chemo was it was difficult, it was intense, it was nothing like, what I received during transplant.
yeah. And thank you so much for listening again. We have like So much more to say. We don't want to bore you, but we have
Yeah.
lots more coming.
Yes, and the next episode is going to be very, very interesting. I'm super excited for this one because we're going to be talking about the transplant. We're going to be talking about how long I had to stay in the hospital for and how I adjusted and coped during that super long period of
Some of
time.
the things we found out, like no more restaurant food, which literally saved us during chemo.
Yeah, so
No more beach.
again, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much.